Too long didn't read Spanish verbs. Let's take a look at how they work in English and in Spanish, and I want you to tell me what you notice. So, we're looking at English verbs, and our subjects are I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. And let's use the verb run. So how would you write a sentence if you wanted to write the shortest sentence you could with just a subject and the verb? I run. You run. We run. They run. And he, she, it run. Ooh. He, she, it doesn't run. He runs. Man, that's weird. If you speak Spanish and you're learning English, one common mistake that you make is to say, he run. Because if all the other forms of the verb are the same, except for that he, she, or it form, it's going to be really easy just to make mistakes and say, okay, everything's run. Well, that's actually incorrect because the correct verb form for he, she, or it is runs. A pattern that you see for that he, she, it is that there's an S there. Other examples, I go, he goes. I scream, he screams. Let's take a look at verbs in Spanish. Verbs in Spanish function differently. And one thing is going to be way easier. You're not going to make that runs mistake that a lot of Spanish-speaking people make when they're speaking in English. The harder thing is that instead of run, every single one of these words is going to be different in Spanish. And it helps us, but it's also harder. Let me show you why. So in Spanish, the verb for run is correr. This is called the infinitive. An infinitive is like a box of Play-Doh that has never been opened up before. That is the pure form of the verb. So correr means to run. If we open up that box and we start messing with the Play-Doh, then we can make different forms of the verb. So the verb for I run is corro. The verb for you run is corres. The verb for he, she, or it runs is corre. The verb for we run is corremos. And the verb for they run is corren. So, in some ways it's harder, and in some ways it's easier than in English. For example, every single form of this verb is different, so I do need to memorize those different forms. But notice I put a parenthesis around the subject. That's because each of these verbs is different, I actually don't need to put the subject in front of it to tell the person who I'm talking to what I'm saying. So instead of saying I run, yo corro, all I need to do is just say corro, and that person knows that I'm saying I run. So most of the time we'll be able to take out that word in Spanish. I also already know the ending of the verb. In this case, it's an ER verb. If you look at these endings, ES, E, EMOS, and EN, these all follow a pattern, and the pattern is for ER verbs. So when I'm writing the different forms of a verb in Spanish, all I need to do is remember the pattern. For ER verbs in the present tense, it's O, es, hemos, and en. So let's try another ER verb and see if it's similar to this. So the first thing that I want to do is create these boxes for the verb that we're going to conjugate. Conjugate means to take an infinitive, that Play-Doh that hasn't been used yet, and to mash it up to make a new word with that infinitive. It's going to take a lot of time if every time I conjugate a verb, I have to write I, you, he, she, it, we, and they. So one thing that we're going to do to save us some time is just to make a box with these. So the only thing that I need to do to remember is to think, okay, this is the I box, this is the you box, this is the he, she, it box, this is the we box, and this is the they box. So I'm going to tell you the first thing that you need to know about this new verb. It ends in ER. Because it ends in ER, I already know what the end of the verb is going to look like. So I'm just going to fill in o, es, hemos, and en. So I'm already halfway done conjugating the verb, and I don't even know what the actual verb is. I just know the ending of my infinitive. So let's look at the rest of the verb. The verb that we're going to use is the verb to read, and in Spanish, that would be leer. So to finish conjugating the verb to read, the only thing I need to do is just add that stem over and over and over again to the endings of the verb that we already know. So in order to say to read in Spanish, this is how you would say it. I read would be leo. You read would be lees. He, she, or it reads would be lee. We read would be leemos. And they read would be leen. And just to remind us what we learned before, if we were to conjugate this verb in English, this is what it would look like. So it might look like it's way easier to conjugate a verb in English than it is in Spanish, but there are a lot of things in Spanish that are way easier than they are in English to learn. That's how you conjugate a verb.